Alright, welcome everybody to another live cast here on the YouTube channel. Once again, I am still Josh Bycer. We have a great cast for you tonight. We're going to be discussing the challenges of launching a game, whether it's an indie game or just any kind of game on Steam or through early access, and what it means when it's time to flip that switch. And joining me tonight is a friend of mine. We just did a podcast about 2, maybe 3 weeks ago at this point. He is one of the co-founders of the Indie Bros. Please welcome Eric Johnson.
Hey Josh, thanks for having me on again.
Eric, it's great to have you on. How are you doing today?
Doing well. It's a whirlwind as usual in the indie game and father of 2 lifestyle. So things are going great.
I can see like your child's drawings in the background too. It's good. I should have gotten some art. I need people to send me fan art, I think, to put into the background of some of these things.
Yep, we definitely do fan art for each other at this house. So.
So, as I was just saying, we recently spoke with Eric, I think it was about like 2 or 3 weeks ago at this point, and there should be like a little card going up in the corner to link to that podcast if you want to give it a listen. For that one, we talked more about kind of the state of the indie market, and what it means to be an indie developer, especially with the changes that you saw over the last 6 years, I think we said.
Yeah, that's right, and then especially over the last 2 years in particular.
Mm-hmm. And there's certainly a lot that goes on in the indie game space. And again, each one of the topics we can bring up, that can easily fill its own cast. So if you're free in the future, I'm sure we can always have you back on for another live or recorded one.
Sounds great.
But as for our topic tonight, we're going to be talking again about game launches. And this is definitely one of the parts I know a lot of developers have they rack their heads over trying to figure out what's the best way to launch their game. I'm sure you can attest to talking to many developers about it as well.
Yeah, I mean it's the most important part of your game's timeline. Essentially, your game's development is launch. It's I don't know the numbers. It determines most of the time, the vast majority of the time, how that game is going to fare commercially. Is that first 24 hours, subsequent 72 hours after that, and the full week, and on and on and on from there. So yeah, it's an incredibly crucial period for your game. Getting it right. There's a lot you can do, but at the same time, there's only so much you can do. There's absolutely a luck element to it, and there's good luck and bad luck that can show up for you during that stretch. So I mean, it's like you said, there's a whole podcast discussion based around this topic alone.
Yeah. Now, before we get it, I almost forgot, for people who didn't listen to our previous cast, could you talk a little bit about what the Indie Bros is and kind of your background when it comes to indie development and indie marketing?
Sure. So we're just sort of a jack of all trades, catch-all indie support company. Our specialty, or rather the thing that people use us the most for, is PR and marketing. Our established contacts within the industry, specifically with influencers and traditional press, YouTubers, streamers, and then also platform holders, including Valve, GOG, Humble, Sony, Microsoft, etc. So that is our company was founded officially, or was made an LLC, I guess, 2 years ago. We've been sort of transitioning over from a single studio with Arent Games into this multi-for-hire business over the last 3 or 4 years, and things really picked up the last year or two. We have helped with the launch of a couple of major titles, including Cook Serve Delicious 2 as of recently. We helped with RimWorld's early access release on Steam, Duskers, both its early access and 1.0 launch, and there's a ton of other games too that I'm really proud of, to have worked on, and to have worked with the developers on, and yeah, so we've gotten to this point basically based on some hard work, and then reputation certainly has not hurt us at all. And the games we've worked with have brought us in, more interested developers, and we're still actively reaching out there to work with developers we think we can make a difference for as well.
Great. And as you said, when it comes to early access, that is its own can of worms when it comes to releasing your game, and we'll be dedicating some time to that later on in the cast as well. They're saying, what you expect when launching a game, multiple crashes, graphical downgrades, day one DLC. 10 years ago, all I expected was to have fun. And like I said, Eric and I, we first spoke in 2012. That was long before the craziness of loot boxes, games as a service, and even early access was a thing. It seems like a bygone era at this point, right, Eric?
Yeah, definitely. I think Team Fortress 2 was just starting to tap into what the current market is ended up, kind of becoming and being, and they were one of the sort of the forefront on that. So, I mean, that's a Valve-related game for whatever that's worth, but that's something that I think about back then when you mentioned games as a service. That was a very rare thing back then, concept. And AI War Fleet Command was certainly on a similar track. We really wanted to release DLC number 10 the next couple of years or whatever. We ended up getting, I think, the DLC number 6 or 7 before we moved on to AI War 2, which we talked about in the last podcast on why we did that.
Yeah. And oh, excuse me, man, this cold of mine doesn't want to go away. I'm sure my voice will be cutting in and out as time goes on, but we'll see what happens. I have multiple bottles of water. Eric has came prepared as well, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, like that was one of the weird things that we saw. And yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on this because we talked about this on our last chat, but we really saw how the market has changed in terms of what people expect from a video game launch, and of course what people expect after the launch. And I'm sure we can probably dedicate some time later on, about the post-game launch and what happens after your game is released. But
sure.
Do you have anything to say?
Well, I was going to say the one thing that we didn't talk about last time that I think is certainly worth mentioning now is now I don't think gaming or indie game development or indie game releases or anything like that I think those things are all here to stay, but the popularity of those things, there may have been a fad-like process that we've already moved through, and I think that's where we're at right now, is that indie games are not this new hot thing anymore. There's an expectation now for them, and the bar has been risen by great releases. So there's I think that's a really huge contributor that I didn't even think to mention, or that we didn't talk about last time. Sorry to interrupt, but that did come to mind.
Yeah, and I think that is a really good point. We've talked about this many times here with either on the live recordcast, that things have certainly gotten a lot harder, I think, to really stand out. I mean, I'm sure you remember the days where when we think indie game, we think like a shovelware, like Breakout clone or Pac-Man ripoff. Today, when you think indie game, you're thinking like a, I wouldn't say like a big budget, but you're thinking like a very substantial game. Like we're expecting, dozens of hours of entertainment from a studio that could be done by like 3 or 4 people. And I'm sure the people in chat can also agree. I mean, we have seen some amazing indie games, stuff that can really compete with the big budget or AAA in terms of our time and attention. I mean, hell, look at the last 3-4 years with stuff like Stardew Valley, Five Nights at Freddy's, Dwarf Fortress, and I'm sure everyone can name like 5 or 6 other indie games that just like wowed them in terms of the market.
Yeah, definitely. And then another thing that came to mind about the market changing and the kind of that fad idea and it wearing off is that was subsequently followed by the race to the bottom effect, which is, if you're aware, I'm sure you're aware of, is all these indie developers, hitting are making decisions to really budget their or budget price their games, or really reduce prices, or go major sales 75, 80, 85, 90% off. I think these it's all that had ramifications on where we're at today. Now there's been there's kind of multiple ramifications for that, because I feel like a lot of a section of indie developers have also rebelled against the race against the bottom just in time, and have said, no, we are going to price our game the price that we feel it is worth, and that higher price will be more of a seal of quality to the prospective buyer. And so that has also had an effect. But here we are in 2018. It's I don't want to say a mess, but it's quite nutty. But I think all those things I just mentioned and what we talked about before have definitely are some of the causes, kind of the cause and effect chains that are happening there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like that kind of race to the bottom has done so much to change what people think about video games. I mean, I remember when $20, $30 was considered acceptable for an indie game. Today, it is pushing things. And just to give you a quick heads up, I think you're coming in just a tiny bit low. It's just a little bit hard here. I'm just trying to adjust sound. How am I coming in, by the way, for you folks watching this live? But while I'm waiting for their response, yeah. The race above, I think this has also been compounded by mobile gaming as well, as really muddied the waters, I think, in terms of what people expect out of a video game these days. And even like for developers who only stick with a PC or Mac launch, they're still feeling the ramifications for people who buy games literally for free on the mobile side.
Yeah, certainly. And I also, the expectations on, like you mentioned, what people were excited to spend money on, how much money, all that sort of has really changed over the last few years, 5 years really. And yeah, it's a big difference. It's definitely about winning over folks who are truly interested in your game, instead of just trying to get it into the hands of every person who just wants to try that new flavor of indie game or whatever. And I mean, it still exists to some extent, but it was more of a thing that you could ride back in the day, and you can't do that anymore.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess here's our first big lesson for any developers watching: you are not special anymore when it comes to your indie game launch. It's no longer oh my god, someone released a game that's not from a big studio, shock and amazement. Now you're just one of 2 to 3 dozen games being released that day.
Yeah, I hope that information has sort of reached every corner at this point, because to me that's nothing new. That has to be something that you are instructed. If you're indie and you're not going through if you don't do university or classes or whatever, and you're not getting that information from teachers, which you might or might not. And on top of that, hopefully you're getting that information somewhere, because it's I wouldn't say it's common knowledge now, but if you follow the industry, if you're reading folks who you should be reading in the industry, this is something that you should have a good understanding of as a developer.
Mm-hmm. Now, here's the question I was going to ask you a few minutes ago, Eric, before I forget this. And this is one that I've been asking a lot of developers and publishers I've had a chance to talk to, and that is, in the past, when we think about the game's success window, a lot of people assume it was about 30 to 45 days in terms of after launch for a game to really make the bulk of its money. I guess on your side, the games that you've dealt with, is that still true, or has that time window been shortened?
I don't have the data or stats right in front of me, so I'm not going to make any, in stone statements or anything like that. But I will say that sounds, still like a pretty accurate metric to work off of. I would say, as far as what you do with that data, you shouldn't be thinking about how to sell my. Well, okay, I don't shun the approach of kind of coming up with a marketing plan that goes 30 or 45 days after your launch, and that's not necessarily what we're talking about, but it would be possibly a good idea to consider if you had done everything leading up to that properly. But it really is that, like we had mentioned before, that first 24 to 72 hour period. To me, that right now, because of how precious visibility is and exposure is direct on the platform itself, so directly on Steam, directly on GOG, or getting any kind of feature on the store where you can purchase the game itself, it's so much more meaningful than even having a really, really major YouTuber cover you, pass the link across to everyone, or rather have it in the descriptions for everybody to kind of click through. Those just, for the most part, typically are not converting at all like they used to. So it's really about nailing that launch, that first week, and really the first day. You got to outcompete. You got to kind of outpace in sales the other games you're competing against in that Steam release window. We've talked about that before, so that you can get on the new and trending section, which puts you on the front page, which gives you a lot more exposure. And then it's really about how you convert. If people are coming to your Steam store page and they're bouncing off of it, then you're not going to see the same sales 30 days or even close to the same sales level as you are now at launch. 15, 30 days, 45 days out, it's not going to happen. Trying to think here. Pick me up, Josh, and I'll pick us up in a second here. But I think I have a part 2 to this. I'm just kind of working it out in my head.
Yeah, and being able to sustain that, I think, has been one of the hardest aspects. Because we talked a few minutes ago about games as a service and what it means to your game after its launch. As I think Mr. was saying earlier, it's no longer you release your game and you're done. Now people expect not just patches, but new content as well. Now, I guess I'm not sure this will be a segue, just continuing from your line of thought about that launch window. Another thing that I've seen some developers have trouble with is, one second, my headset just messing up there, is the idea of, I guess, as you just said, sustaining that profit over a long period of time. Like, for a lot of games, I guess from the games that you've managed to look at and some of the games that you've worked with, is that a possibility that, let's say a game has a bad launch, like no one really covers it, can they bounce back from that? Or is it a case where if you miss that window, that kind of, is the nail in the coffin, 5 months, a year, 2 years down the line?
You should be very realistic about the idea of it being your nail in the coffin if it doesn't go very well. It doesn't mean that you have to accept that, but you have to at least accept it as being a possibility, because the statistics say that that's probably going to be the case. If you don't launch well, recovery is going to be really difficult. Now, I think we talked about it in the podcast. We talked about the idea of moving on to another subsequent release. And so essentially not just putting all your chips onto a release that may have, maybe I'm using all these metaphors now with chips and sinking ships. But the whole point is that if you're putting all your chips in with a sinking ship, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? You'd want to have something kind of in the hopper, in the pipeline for subsequent release, and you'd want that to be probably a completely different individual launch, even if it's a sequel. If you feel like you can pull that off, development wise and design wise, then I think you have to think about if you want to call it, and it's not a retry, but if you want to get a retry at hitting Steam big, you have to make a new product. If it doesn't go well at launch, I feel like that is something to bank on. That said, there are always exceptions to the rule. Passion and the right people who champion that passion. So as in, like, if you're really passionate about your game and making it the best thing it can be, maybe it launched the game was, it's all about how it launched, right? So if the game is considered really amazing, it's well done, it's complete. We're not talking about games as a service there, and if it doesn't sell very well, then what do you do? I mean, there's not really, if it depends on the genre, you might not have anything else to add, anything meaningful. So that's something to think about. If you have something that you feel like, hey, please just show, this is the catch-22 of most games as a service, as far as the philosophy is that if you don't have the sales, then you're walking out on a line without a net if you keep developing the game post-launch and the sales don't ever show up. You waste man hours, you waste money at that point. That's just the business side of it. I mean, that's all there is to it.
And then the other issue is if you don't have that kind of content promise or plan, people are going to be thinking, what the hell are you doing? Why should I give you money for this game? And I don't know that, what's coming 2, 6, 12 months down the line. And
it gets back to what kind of game you have, right? So if you have a completed adventure game, that everybody's in love with, then you're just hoping that the sales go really well at launch, like they're supposed to, and that people talk about that and they go, this is a wonderful experience. And any talk of I hope that there's more might not be post-launch updates or things of that sort. It might just be like, hey, we're going to keep talking about the game on our Steam store page so that new people coming in, new impressions on our Steam store page months down the line, we'll still see that we're actively there. We're still as developers, we're still making mentions about what we're working on now. If we're moving on to if it's an adventure game, maybe there's an episode 2, or maybe there's like a brand new game that we were able to develop based on the success of the first one. So those are things that it just depends on your game, right? So if your game is something that it's like a roguelike, that they want to see all that bonus content, they want to see it just dripping with feature. It should be dripping at features at launch, and then if at all possible, it should be like soaked in features by a year end. Completely turgid. But but it's just like you have to also not. I just think it's a completely. If you're happy developing a game post launch for a year and sales don't turn around, but you're proud of that, then there shouldn't be any concern about what you're doing, because if that's what's making you happy and you're able to pay the bills however you're able to, then great and stuff. But as far as banking on making money, you have to be very realistic about things when things don't go well at launch.
Yeah, as a good example, when I spoke with Jay Burgett from Shadowhand, he talked about, the expectations he had and the worries he had, and he's already planning plan B and plan C on what happened if Shadowhand didn't do well, or if it didn't do enough to justify continuing that game. And as you said, Eric, you have to be realistic about that. And I think that's one of the big things that separates the developers who can stay in this industry versus the ones who kind of fizzle out. That you can't. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's why Jake's going to be doing. Making more games until he doesn't want to anymore, is because he understands he's an excellent planner. He's an excellent he realistically sees the potentials of what can occur, and he figures out contingencies for them, and that is a cardinal thing you should have as an indie developer, a cardinal sense. Is being able to navigate through difficult, if nay impossible times.
Yeah. Now, I want to get to a question in chat, and if you want to see the chat log as well, Eric, you should be able to view it from that link that I sent you as well.
Alrighty.
While it's going up, Loose Tube asks, I think we may have asked this on our previous talk, but how long should one keep a game alive with new content versus just outright jumping to a sequel or, as you just said, working on something new?
Well, I mean, it's based on the sales, right? So if you're not seeing any sales at all, then you already crossed that line as far as a business sense of, maybe this isn't a good idea, as far as, financially for us to do this. If the sales are, a standard release now, in the last couple of years might not see a whole lot of baseline, as in full price, sales, in between the discount periods. So that essentially means that you have to figure out, navigate or come up with a schedule, for discounts, hopefully feature discounts, things that you can get, put up in places on, your platform holders, store pages and store sites, that they can get that as featured as possible, mentioned on social media, all that. Yeah, those things are super important. Trying to wrap up here. See.
I guess as a follow through, or as a continuation from that, I guess here's a quick question. This could probably be like a 40 minutes right here, but what do you think about the rise of bundles as an option for developers? Because we've talked about this before with, Humble Bundle, Indie Gala. I'm sure there's 5 or 6 other ones I'm forgetting right now. But from my general thought, or from the general opinion I've heard, is that bundling is not the smartest thing to do until, once your game is way past its, sell time or its lifespan in the market.
Right, and and I agree with that. I think there are exceptions to that. Humble you have the ability in certain cases, depending on your game, to enter a Humble bundle at a price tier. So, I'm going to have this game up on the next big Humble bundle, but it's only going to be available to those purchasing at the $9.99 price point or above. I don't have any numbers to suggest that that's safely protecting your game, but it feels like the price itself, if you say, okay, I'm behind this $10 paywall versus a pay what you want situation, you're probably not damaging your game that badly. There is talk about, over the last few years, about the idea that people who get your game through Humble bundles might review it more poorly or more just quickly, brashly, unjustly, however you want to define it. There certainly is that. Steam has combated that a little bit by making those reviews not count in the percentage. I believe things keep changing on that front. So, but yeah.
Now, a few questions I want to touch on. Again, each one of these topics we could just spend like the next hour and a half chatting about, so trying to keep things at least somewhat on track. But one really good question Oscar just brought up in chat: relaunching a changed or polished version of a game, is that viable, and is there any data on that? So for those of you watching what we're talking about, we're referring to games that after either a poor launch or a launch that was just okay, will release an updated or enhanced version of the game that will then become the new retail product. So stuff like, again, Brigador Up Armored that we talked with Hugh about last time, Skyshine's Bedlam, Planetary Annihilation. I'm sure there's a few other ones I'm forgetting.
Well, I mean, and then there's like the successful version of this question, which are, the game would be Binding of Isaac, which has redone itself.
Oh yeah.
5 times or whatever?
I think I've owned all 5 times of those versions too.
Completely to its benefit, and completely to Edmund's benefit. So, I mean, it gets back to whether or not your game is commercially viable in the first place, right? So if you're not seeing, say if you are seeing a lot of interest, but you just kind of botched release or botched your launch in some way, then then that may be a viable option for you. The enhanced edition release is essentially like releasing a new product as far as Steam is concerned. So that weighs in your benefit as far as, okay, I get to launch, essentially get a like we talked about there are no retries, but it's like a second chance. You spend your work to get another chance at a Steam launch, and that's certainly that's there with the enhanced edition, I think. Then you have to, of course, think about sort of the semantics of that and the details, like how, what am I going to do with the non-definitive version? Am I going to leave it up? I've seen certain developers change that version to free, or pull it from the store entirely. But if it's, don't just do an enhanced edition of something that didn't sell well in the first place, because it's, unless you want to see the exact same result, which is going to be the most likely thing.
Yeah. And I think you had a really good point there, Eric, that the games that do seem to get the most benefit from this are either ones that you see a massive radical change, like we saw with Skyshine's Bedlam, or even Brigador just trying to completely rebrand their control scheme, or something that was already successful. It becomes more like the icing on the cake. You already have a great product, we're just going to make it better. Even stuff like in the AAA market, like when we see like Game of the Year editions, or like what Overkill did with Payday 2, that when you buy like the Game of the Year edition, you get everything that came out during that period.
Yeah, you can't get away with you have to have some difference or some radical change if you're not, like you said, already just having people successful and wanting more. But I was going to say, I guess my thought was that it's definitely never a bad move to do something that no one else has done before, as long as it's ethical and by the book and legal and all that. If you can do that, traditional press will find that interesting. They might cover your game when they wouldn't have otherwise, given your guys' history and your team's history with your game.
So what you're saying is, don't put in like some free drugs with your game purchase. Like, don't do anything like that. That may be unique marketing, but no, that won't help you in the long run.
Well, yeah, again, you got to keep it clean, I suppose. But I mean, as far as rebranding, things of that sort, I don't think that there's a time that it's, oh, this is too late. I mean, there's always something that you give up when you rebrand, but you can, there's every opportunity to get it back.
Yeah. Yep, there you go, mister. That's exactly what I was saying. But I'm trying to think. There's a question I wanted to ask you a few minutes ago about launching. We talked about pre-release. We are going to talk about post-release. I think we want to say that for more the back end of our cast. I think after we talk more about game launches. I wrote down a question just in case I forgot, but now I forgot the question before that one. Let me see. We talked about launching. We talked about enhanced editions. Here's a question. I want to get your thoughts. Like, getting back again to how things have changed over the last 6 years, or even over the last decade. You, of course, mentioned YouTubers, streamers, influencers, stuff like that. And we didn't talk too much about this on our last chat, but I just want to bring it up here. What do you think about how things have moved in that sense, where we've gone from traditional game journalism, print or website media, to more about internet personalities selling games, your Markipliers, Northern Lions, PewDiePie, and even big name streamers as well. Like I saw the Game of the Year awards. What was his name? Dr. something. I don't follow big streamers myself, but who won, like, biggest gamer or most influencing gamer of the year, that kind of thing. So, what do you think about how things have moved in terms of game coverage?
Right. So I think this ties into the idea that there are less, and this might be just like wrong, and if someone has to argue this, I would be open to hearing it, but it feels like this ties back into the idea that following indie game sites, following video game sites, all of that, even following YouTubers to some extent, the shine has worn off. It's not a fad, I guess. They're here to, all those things are here to stay. But just the raw popularity of it, of those things, have definitely really tapered off over the last several years. And developers respond accordingly. They see, okay, well, if I'm not getting some are like us, I think our philosophy is that that kind of exposure is still important, even if it's not converting sales directly. So we talked about that before, the idea that there's a psychological benefit for folks to have seen your game before they hit before you launch your game, or before they have the opportunity to buy it. Get me back on track here, Josh. Give me the question again.
About your thoughts on how these influencers have become a major part of game publicity and game journalism.
Right. So I guess I was getting at that the influencers their shine has started to come off a bit as well. Now, the popularity is certainly there. But I suppose that they're
it's all kind of just like a screaming noise into the void at this point. There's so many people doing it.
Right. And I think their function has changed. So their function is not maybe it never was this, but their function at one point just happened to work out to be helping you sell your game. But that doesn't seem to be the case anymore, largely. Now, there are of course exceptions, but I've talked to numerous devs now that have had experiences, major channels, millions of views, traffic converts over to the Steam page okay, sales convert even just not even decently. So this is the sort of brave new world we're in right now, where we're going, well, then who do we reach out to champion us, that can really make a difference for us? And the answer is, I don't know if it's any individuals. There are always exceptions, like I said, but you need to go reach audiences, and you need to go reach people who audiences that are going to be actually interested in what you have to offer them. And you need to be spending a lot of time researching that and figuring out, okay, these are the best individuals that have audiences that fit my niche, or my game's niche. But if you're not doing that, yeah, you're gonna find yourself in trouble, because and if you don't have connections, or if you don't have a pre-existing community to help you bolster your exposure and your visibility on your platform, and we've mentioned Steam several times now, but that's certainly the one that I'm most familiar with. And if you get to a point where you get on Steam and you're not doing very well, I'm not sure that press and YouTubers, if you didn't launch very well, I'm not sure that they're going to make the difference. And actually, I'm quite sure in most cases they won't. The way that currently works, because even if you get the way the market is right now, even if you get that exposure bump, and say a few sites or even dozens of sites cover you, and you get a ton of YouTube coverage for a small window of time, that will wash away. That will move. People will move on. And if you're not, if you haven't improved your stake as far as how much exposure you can get on Steam, then you're going to go right back into the same bucket you were in before, which is trouble generating any kind of attention and sales.
Yeah. And I guess as a quick shout for myself, I would certainly champion your games. I mean, I love talking about game design, and as you can see, we love talking to developers here. So if you have a game that you want me to take a look at and you're watching this right now, get in touch with me. But I have a few thoughts about this myself, about why YouTubers and streamers aren't converting as much. And I want to get your thoughts on this, Eric. I guess the first thing is, it was pointed out, I think Loose2 mentioned this a few minutes ago, about many YouTubers will highlight games that are comically bad, or they'll put on a show for the audience that doesn't necessarily show the game in the best light, it shows them in the best light. And I'm just thinking, maybe that could that could be one thing that's affecting it, that they're really only tuning into these games to watch the person's reaction, not to so much watch a game that they're thinking about buying or playing. Like, to give you an example, like, I've watched, Markiplier's plays of Five Nights at Freddy's, and I'm like, yeah, it's funny he's doing that, but I have no, watching him play that game is not going to make me spend money on that series.
Right. And that's an important, I think that's an important aspect to think about is that YouTuber you're reaching out to, is their audience actively interested in purchasing games, or are they there just to laugh and admire, or whatever the case is with the individual, with the personality. So you have to go find the YouTubers that are out there, like there's Worth a Buy, there's Blitz, there's other guys that are out there that are really doing great stuff, as far as pretty big folks that their focus is to show off games to their audience for potential purchase, right? So you have to go out there and find people who are still basically reviewers. I mean, it's not a whole lot different, willing to talk about the pros and cons, and whether or not they would drop 10, 15, 20, etc. dollars on this particular product. And when we have folks that do that and it goes well, and they recommend the game, I think there's definitely more benefit to that. Although at the same time, you still might not see the sales translation you want. I honestly think that thinking of individual sources as sort of ways to hit it big is a bad way to think about things these days. It has to be kind of everything has to be cobbled together.
Yeah. And I think you had a really good point there about the audience of the YouTubers, because I think there's a very big difference between someone who shows a game off with the intent to give you as much detail about as possible, versus someone who uses a game essentially for their show. And I think that's a very big point there, that you can see this again with a lot of the big name YouTubers, that they'll play a game, but you're not really paying attention to the game. You're paying attention to whatever, crazy face they make, or how much they scream about the game, or the game is just so heavily cut that you're not really seeing what it means to play that game.
Yeah, and the true reviewers, or the people who are truly giving games like a look over, are vastly outnumbered at the highest level, versus what we're talking about, these individual personalities that are basically just trying to entertain and all that.
Yeah, I was trying to remember one other YouTuber that I liked, and I can't remember his name. He did a lot of, I think, XCOM and XCOM 2 videos. I just can't remember. I think he even went to Firaxis at one point to do like an interview of it. But I can't. I'm sure someone watching this will probably type the name in chat at any second. But while we're waiting for that, we better get to our topic, because we're about 45 minutes in and we haven't even talked about game launches yet. So if anyone has, I guess, any, let's see, games. Oh, thank you, mister. If anyone has any like quick last questions about just like indie development for Eric, get them in now, because we'll move on to talk more about game launches, because again, this is an hour and a half topic easily. And we still have to get to early access as well, and even games as a service after that. So we'll see if we can make it. We're going to do our best tonight. Fortunately, Eric doesn't have a window in the background like Hugh did, so we're not going to see like the changing time as things get dark as we're talking. But you'll probably see on my end, although you may not, because I have the Skype window blocking. But let's talk about game launches, because that's kind of our main topic, and will lead us probably through to our other parts as well. So, again, as we said at the beginning, launching your game is a very big deal. And for those of you watching, we're not going to talk about early access just yet. That's going to be the topic after this. But when it comes to launching your game, this is the time when you have to show your game in front of, hundreds, if not thousands of eyes. So I guess the first question I have for you, Eric, is when like you're working with Arent, or let's say an indie developer gets in touch with you and they say we need your help to launch our game, what is the first thing you think about in terms of getting that game out there?
First thing I think about is lead times. I'm desperately hoping that they haven't contacted me a week before their release, and that's
Yeah,
too often the case.
I know.
But after that, you have to look at the game itself. You have to look at the product. Is it commercially viable? Is it a quality product? Is it good? Is it is it the same as anything else that's already out there in the market? And that may or may not matter, actually, but that is something to consider. And after you get through that whole process of deciding or figuring out, hey, this game is something worth putting weight behind, then it's about coming up with, hitting the main 6 or 7 areas that you need to hit, which is marketing, PR, community management, social media is included in that, testing, making sure that I think business decisions, financial decisions are part of that. Making sure that there's actually companies out there that you can hire to, you can pay them essentially to do a mock review of your game, and if you pay well enough, you can get someone who can pretty accurately give you an impression of what your Metacritic score might be, or things of that sort. And so that can go a long ways. If you don't have the money for that, then go find someone who's willing to review for free. We talked about having friends potentially, friends potentially do it, but you want to make sure that they're going to be honest friends and people who will actually give you good, honest feedback, and not just be like, "Oh, that's awesome that you did this."
I spoke with John Brieger about this playtesting. He said that there are people who just say, "I love your game. It's the greatest game in the world. 10 out of 10." It's like, yeah, but how does that help me when it comes to what it's going to do in the market?
Right. That's a good Steam user review, but that's not really helpful in tester feedback at all. Yeah. So it's not a great Steam user review, but we'll take you'll take that one. But yeah, I think having an approach about obviously coming up with a list. We have a database of folks that we would say, what's this genre fall under? Who would we reach out to, for a game like this normally? Who are the folks that are regularly covering this kind of genre or championing these kind of games? And then, you have to get more creative beyond just that thought as well. Does this art style speak to certain individuals or certain sites? Are there non game related outlets out there that might be interested in your game for some reason or for one reason or another, given its narrative or whatever the case may be there. So, but building a big old list of people I think would actually take the time to play the game would definitely be a good place to start. Looking at anything we could leverage from their past, if a developer has past releases, if they have if they have any sort of history that especially positive history that's public, that can be a really nice thing to leverage as well. But it's really about thinking about okay, we need to not run around with our hair on fire here, but there are several different elements that we need to make sure that are all up and running. And that it's a game of spinning plates for folks who work for me and like myself. It's a game of spinning plates. You're just going all over the place all the time, and the second you let down and you're not going, making sure that you're really keeping everything up to speed, then things start wobbling and falling off, and at that point, it all falls apart as a whole, because you're you're not effectively doing everything individually like that you're supposed to.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking about like popular genres or looking at if a game is going to be viable, that actually takes me to a question that I wanted to ask in the last section, but I think this could actually be a good transition question for you. And that is one of the things that we've seen, or as someone who gets emails from publishers and developers, that I have seen my fair share of developers chasing after popular genres. I mean, when Dark Souls blew up, it's been like 4 or 5 years at this point. We have seen many games go for it's just like Dark Souls. And then I was just showing about this with the people on my Discord channel. Now I've been getting emails from people saying it's the next PUBG. We're making the next Battle Royale game. And I want to get your thoughts on this in terms of viable genres when it comes to launching your game. Like, I think I know the answer to this one myself, but I just want to kind of get like confirmation from you. Is it wise to chase after the big boys when it comes to, what games to work on and what games to launch?
Right. So, I mean, it's a good question, and I mean, the simple answer, the obvious answer, and I agree with you, is no.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have chasing, to me, means that you're just designing very similarly. If you have a battle royale or whatever game with a twist on it that takes something to the next level, or that makes something that evolves things from where PUBG is at this point, then that's that could be potentially viable. You could be the next big thing, especially if you really believe that what you have and what's missing from the games on the market is going to make all the difference. If you really believe heavily in that mechanic or that feature or whatever we're talking about, I think you can predict the market somewhat if you're really eyes on it, and if you're really into squeezing out data wherever you can. Steam and Steam Spy, and seeing the new releases and seeing how those do. You could probably get a good sense, something that we're not optimized to do, but we're trying to kind of figure out, because you do get a sense of, okay, this is a game, these genres are finding more traction than these genres right now, but hopefully you're going to be able to eventually get enough data and information to say, okay, I can kind of I'm willing to make predictions 6 months, 12 months, 2 years down the road about, is our roguelike, I'm working on a roguelike right now. Is that going to be, it's been, obviously there's an ebb and flow, I think, with roguelikes. I think that it's really popular for a time. They came in really like a ton over the last several years. There's some ennui with it at this point. But if there's a new roguelike out with a cool, new mechanic, or it's bringing out something that hasn't been brought out in a long time, that's a good thing to mention. Is it doesn't have to be new. It just has to be something that people have forgotten about.
Oh, yes.
And so if you have something like that, and you're saying, okay, that I think by the time we have this game launched, that will be, as long as we stay on schedule, we launch when we're planning to launch, that can work out really well, because we think that just going off of the data we have, that roguelikes will be back in at that point, essentially. So there's certain things to think about in that way. To me, that's something that you do after you already have sort of established some good game design traits, and then have gotten the response on those prototypes or those early designs to suggest, hey, I can continue forward, and these are commercially viable, just from the eye test, play test, whatever, just from people trying it out that I trust to give me good, honest feedback.
Yeah, and Like I've spoken to several developers. Like as you said, it's very hard sometimes to predict where the market will go. Like I spoke with Charles from Gyro Technologies, who did the game Heat Signature, and when he started that game, I think it was like 2011, 2012. There were no like space style games out there. There weren't any that he was thinking of, and then that market really took off, thanks to, of course, Star Citizen getting kickstarted. So many more Elite Space Frontiers and so on. And sometimes you just never know what's going to spark that interest. Like a really good example would be PUBG. One day no one knew about it, the next every YouTuber and streamer imaginable was playing that.
Right, and that's just part of the viral nature of things. Once it hits a certain point, and that game absolutely hit that point. I would say RimWorld hit that point at one. Well, that's maybe multiple points, but certainly at early access on Steam, it was a different kind of the way the popularity was just different.
Or even something like Minecraft. I think that was like one of the first really big cases of came out at like the perfect time, and at this point it's become a fixture of pop culture now.
Yeah, it's the timeline's always fuzzy on that. I know he even in alpha, pre-Steam, he had come back to deal with like a 5-figure amount on his account or whatever, like from just a ton of sales over a weekend he was gone or whatever. So things that blow up huge, they're usually blowing up small for a while first. It's really rare. I haven't seen the numbers for PUBG, but I wouldn't be you think they'd have thousands of users for quite a while before they hit that millions. And when you have multiplayer games like that, and you're trying to reach that level of players, then I'm sure I don't know about their investments and all that, but I would imagine they had some sort of situation set up to have as many testers as possible. And obviously they have a player tester relationship, kind of going on with that game, I think, heading into early access, and now they're at 1.0 and all that. But
yeah, and like as a really good example, like it's always funny when I see like major sites cover indie games I've already talked about or all my friends already know about, because as you just said, Eric, that for a lot of these games, it's not just them just magically appearing one day with millions of sales. They kind of had those mini explosions to begin with. Darkest Dungeon being a really good example. Before the major sites cover that, my friends were talking about it, some of the people I were following covering it, and then it just followed through on that. Like very recently, I saw people now talking about games like Slay the Spire and They Are Billions. And I've already covered those games, weeks in advance, and so has a lot of other people. But again, they had that success to begin with that then, gave them the notice from the bigger guys. And then, as we said before on these casts, basically success breeds success in these cases.
Yep, that's true wherever you go, and that seems to be quite the case in this situation. But I'm just kind of reading some of the comments right now, and that definitely we're just getting back to the idea of chasing or what genres you should do. So someone mentioned genre twists can help too, and I definitely agree with that. Genre blending, you have to be careful there. It has to work together. And Arent we're like a mad scientist studio at doing those kind of things. So we've seen the good and bad of those. But I also think that if you want it to be good for sure. If it's just good, it might not be good enough. If you can make it good and weird or unique or different in some way, that's a big deal too. So if you we had the commenter mentioned the cowboy western themed games are kind of rare. Experimenting with a genre, like obviously something that like some people are used to seeing. You can't just take away space if you're going to do a space game, but things the idea of bringing a Western theme where into a genre that just has been not been experimented with that before, or has, there's a gap there.
Yeah.
If you have a good idea, a good narrative idea for that, then that might be worth your time.
Yeah, a good example of that would be like Shadow Tactics from last year, or I think maybe even late 2016. That, and this goes back to what you were saying earlier regarding not exactly reinventing the wheel, but doing something that hasn't been seen in a long time. They went after the Commandos real-time tactical market, but in the genre of Japanese samurai and ninjas, and it really blew up for them. And getting back to what Lucy was saying, I think I got the ultimate game then. We need to do a cowboy western, visual novel, dating sim, roguelike with battle royale. I think that's going to be the next thing right there. You want to publish that one? Would you like to?
Yeah, like give me a test build. If you could smoothly blend those together, we'll be in business. But yeah, like that's really true. Everything mentioned there is spot on. So.
Yeah. Now, getting back to launching or pre-launching your game, I guess I have a two-part question for you. So I guess the first part is, when a developer reaches out to you, or from what you've done with Arent and some of the other companies you work with, what should you have, I guess, in terms of either documentation, game progress, or anything like that, when it's time to start thinking about how to prepare for your launch?
Are you talking about like media assets?
Yeah, like media assets, how far the game is along, like basically like the pre-launch work that you should have
right.
done.
So, and something you should think about is when to go public. Obviously, if you can go public with your game and that you're working on it years in advance, that's great. If it doesn't visually show very well years in advance, then you probably should not do that. Because first impressions are huge, right? And there's that funny way of Google Images kind of capturing that first mention of your game and encapsulating it forever and ever and ever and ever, versus any of the new media that you would try to throw out there. So you want to make sure that when you're going public, and this isn't talking about launching, but just going, notifying the world about your game that it exists. You want to have make sure that that's a really good first impression, both visually and within the descriptions and what folks are getting out of the game. You want to obviously a pre-release trailer, I think is critical. That ties into the idea of recognition, of folks recognizing your game, or of even knowing about your game, and then recognizing your game once it launches on Steam or wherever it launches. Having that, there's a talk out there that somebody suggested getting a YouTube pre-release trailer to 100,000 views would bode well. It would be a good sign for you heading into your commercial launch.
Yeah.
No guarantees on that, of course, but it's a good idea.
A really great example, of course, again, would go back to Darkest Dungeon, who they had, like, I heard about their game at the Kickstarter, but I know people who heard about them, 6 months to a year prior, with some of the teaser art they put up, some of the proof of concept trailers they did. And as you just said, Eric, when your game is in a state that it can draw someone's eye to it, that'll probably be the best time to do. Like, you don't want to put up like alpha version 0.00001 when it's just I pick up a box and I put it down. That's what I have so far.
Yeah, if it's work in progress, it has to be like really dazzling work in progress. It needs to look really good.
It's got a pop.
It has to. It has to impress like final work would. And then maybe that work in progress works to your advantage because they go, wow, it looks like this great, and it's not done
now
yet.
What will look like so and so. And Mr. had a really good point. He said one of the problems with revealing your game like very early is that the longer the audience has to wait, the more the hype will die down. And keeping hype levels going, not just in the pre-launch state, but of course, again, when we talk about early access later on, is a very hard skill. I think it's one thing that a lot of developers tend to struggle with. I guess for
Yeah.
you, like, what do you say in terms of how do you keep people interested in a title when it may not be out for 6 months, 12 months, even 2, 3 years down the line?
Well, I mean, first to answer the question, it's kind of, or to the comment
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, it's kind of a philosophical difference. So if you feel like um, you can't, I mean, or rather, I'm a believer that this is, we talked about this before during today, the recognition factor.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that we mentioned, I think I mentioned Mega Curie before, and then Spy Party has that. Do you know Spy Party? Has that
Yeah,
ever launched? Okay, did
it
that ever
is.
hit 1.0?
I don't think it's at 1.0
I think
yet.
it's still in early access,
Mm-hmm.
or I think it's on Steam. Maybe it's not actually. Maybe it's still in pre
Mm-hmm.
early access beta. But my point is that games like that certainly are not losing anything by the way they've gone about things. And that game, whenever it does reach 1.0, we'll see really good sales. I think based on what how he's gone about exposing and bringing his game to the public.
Mm-hmm.
Chris Hecker, that is. Um, as far as keeping the hype up, uh, that's certainly important. Um, there's also the other side of it where you say, okay, what if we don't get hype going till too late,
Mm-hmm.
and then we launch and there's just not enough kind of coverage that's been established at that point. People are Googling your game and they're finding very little about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think to me that's worse to have that than to have had a really major kind of hype spike early on, and you're like, oh, how do we recapture that? Well, hopefully I think the main thing you need to do is when your hype is at its highest, you need to be leveraging that as best you can, and that means getting an email list set up, which is pretty universally, from all the developers I talk to, one of the best, most beneficial marketing tools you could have, is an emailing list with people who are really interested in hearing about you and what you're doing, and using that emailing list wisely and only contacting them when you have
Mm-hmm.
something to support. That is certainly a way, I think, to combat in the early going hitting the hype that early on, and then maybe saying, oh, we have months, maybe years of bridge work here to get to release. I mean, on top of that, social media,
Mm-hmm.
community management, keeping your testers around and building that audience, the tester audience that you have. Maybe at some point making the decision to convert those testers into players, where you are offering a purchased version of your pre-release game, pre-Steam release. So all of that is important. I think it's up to your philosophy on things. You have to, if with my philosophy, I believe that we're going to be able to pick back the hype up enough heading towards launch if we had a big
Mm-hmm.
exposure and big spike earlier on. I think I have to tell myself that we're going to be able to get the exposure and that visibility up enough, maybe not as high, maybe and probably not as high as we did before, but enough so that when the game comes out, there's that expectation that people are ready for it to release, they're ready to buy it, and then in addition, you have all the folks that have been exposed to it recently, and all the folks that were exposed to it, not recently. All those folks now have the opportunity to come across it now in a purchasable state.
Mm-hmm.
So that I think that benefits you more than saying, we should just time this right, hype it out like 3 months ahead, which all sounds great, but I think it's really hard to pull off most of the time to say, okay, we only have 6 weeks to 8 weeks to pull all this off or whatever. And then if you don't do it, you're pardon my French, you're up shit's creek at that point if you don't get it right in your time window. Whereas I feel like it's an extraneous thing if you're like, well, we had a really good hype, a year and a half ago. That's kind of a happy problem to not extraneous, but it's kind of like a happy problem to solve. How do we get that attention back, or whatever the case is? But I think the best way to go about it is to not miss out on the opportunity when it first happens and you're actually getting that hype.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and going back to what you were saying a few minutes ago regarding the various soft skills, community management, social media, stuff like that. With developers you work with, or with what you've seen, are there any common pitfalls that any developers tend to mess up with when it comes to preparing their game for launch?
With community management and social media, you want to make sure that you have, and I think we talked about this before in the last podcast, you want to make sure you have the right head for it mentally. If you're not experienced, you're not experienced in general with taking player criticism, feedback, and all the highs and lows of that, then you might want to consider having someone help you out with that, or just if you can't pay for it, then have either a friend or your significant other or someone kind of be a buffer for you there. You don't want to make a wrong move as far as reacting poorly. Mm-hmm. As far as handling the work itself, I think that's something that's a misstep. I think a lot of folks think I can develop my game, handle my community, put together a social media pipeline. You don't have to put together a social media pipeline. What I mean by that is just saying, okay, I'm going to come up with a bunch of content over the next 6 months to kind of strategically release on Twitter or on Facebook to kind of keep, like you said, attention and hype and all that. If you're a Twitter wizard, you might not even need to do that. You might just be like, hey, I'm on Twitter all the time. Mm-hmm. I have super Twitter charisma and everything's going really well for me. If that's the case, then make sure you're leveraging that for your game design and for your career and everything. But if you're actively doing that, just sort of as the Twitter etiquette goes, then that's going to look really, really, that's going to be the best version that you can do. Most of us aren't like that, and that's okay. Again, that's where I think coming up with a pipeline instead of just being like, I'll wing it, I'll come up with something when it's time, or this or that, or I'll make time for it when you probably won't. Those are things that definitely I think are errors that are made. And then of course, if you have, again, this is all about catch-22s, and if you feel like you have the time to do this, it's worth, I think, putting in some time to think about some creative approaches to social media. So not just the the bare minimum or what's expected, or you want to make sure you mention all the updates and all the major stuff and the pricing and the announcements and everything that you would do there normally. But I know we've worked with some developers that have used characters from in-game characters to be the kind of the megaphone for their Twitter. So it's that's kind of a unique thing. It's not unique, rather. It's a different kind of thing that you could do. If you feel like, hey, we want to get folks immersed in this world or immersed in this game, we might start speaking through the game or having the game speak, kind of speak for us, as opposed to separating entirely and just being the developer of the game or being the social media manager of the developer of the game. So
yeah. And one thing that I see a lot of developers tend to mess up on is getting a website or some kind of online presence for their game. Like, I've had cases where I want to email a developer about their game, and I cannot find a website, a contact page, anything for them out there on the internet. And it seems like that's one of those things that you want to get as early as you can once you're set on your development.
Yeah, I mean, it's to me, website, trailer, and then like you said, if your trailer is pulling people in, then they're gonna probably move on to looking for a press kit, additional descriptions and media and art assets, and that's something that you want to have basically as ready to go as you can be at that time of the game's development. Whatever you can have, you should. But obviously don't come out too early with a trailer or screenshots or any visuals that you feel is going to be a detriment in the long run.
Yeah. And I want to go back to what LooseTube commented on a few minutes ago, and that's when talking about promoting your game, be careful not to promote features that could get the axe in the end. Stuff that isn't a part of your core gameplay loop. You need to be really careful about what you publicize your game with. Earlier when we talked about using popular genres, if you say your game is, let's go back to Dark Souls. If you say your game is Dark Souls meets a platformer, and it's going to be a super easy game, people are going to call you out for it. Just as if you say, my game is going to have 70 worlds to explore that are on par with No Man's Sky in terms of their space, and your game's a release and that's not in there, people are not going to be happy with you. And you have to be really careful with what you reveal about your game.
Right. I think that's pretty crucially important, is that you have your game has been scoped or scaled or however you need to before you go public with it, and you feel confident that you're going to be able to deliver on what you have promised. And if you can't, then there has to be a lot of honesty, and obviously it helps that if it turns out that you couldn't because of some unexpected turn of events or reason, because that obviously people are more understanding of that than you just saying that you were going to do this and then you just end up not doing it.
Yeah. And that level of transparency is definitely king, and it has become one of the, I think, big feathers in the cap for indie developers for the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, the fact that I can talk to you, or the fact that I can email a developer and say, hey, you want to come to my podcast and talk about your game, and they say, sure. I mean, that is huge. Like, I've been saying this for now. I would love to talk to someone at Nintendo, but I don't think I'm going to be finding Shigeru Miyamoto's email address and saying, hey, could you come onto my podcast and talk to me for an hour?
Right. And I think that goes back to, or it doesn't necessarily go back to, because we haven't talked about this, but the idea that indie development, indie games is a really, still at this point, still through everything we've been through, I feel like we're still establishing ourselves. We still feel fledgling in certain aspects, and I think the best. I don't think it's hard to understand that the best way a fledgling industry becomes a mature industry is a support of each other and support of itself, and building itself up and promoting each other and all that. So, obviously all ethically and by the book and all that, but yeah, it's something you have to remember as you get, I think, further along and you work deeper into your career, is all the times that more experienced folks than myself came up to me and explained to me something maybe that, or gave me some great advice or explained to me something that I was doing wrong. And how invaluable that was to me. So I think it's really important that that spirit keeps going with indie game developers, that we share, that we talk, that we support, and that goes for anybody, not just indie game developers, but anybody in the community of indie games that supports the existence of folks making their products without kind of unfettered, without worry of this or that idea and stuff, and of course there's that gets into the idea of there's actually some good publishers out there that still let you do that, so it's not like it's the end of the world if you if you partner with someone like that down the line or at some point. But yeah, it's definitely nice to have.
Mm-hmm. Now, before I get to a really interesting question I want to ask you about launching games, Eric, I want to do a quick time check. We are just about an hour and 20 into the stream. What I think we'll do is maybe spend another 5 to 10 minutes on this topic. We'll talk about early access, then we'll talk about games as a service. But I'm going to say, in terms of actual length, let's see about ending probably like in 40 minutes. That works. So like right at the 2 hour mark. I would say that'll probably be our stop point if that works.
Okay.
But here's a very interesting question I wanted to ask you about when it comes to launching your game, and that is picking the time to do it. One thing I think, a big misconception I think some people may have about games is that when the game is done, you flip a switch, it goes live, everybody's happy, it comes out. But in the AAA space, we know that developers will release a game, or they'll make the game go gold, and then they'll wait, 2 to 3 months, either for marketing or printing the game out. But I guess when it comes to the independent space, like, what kind of lead in do we typically see in terms of the game being done to the game being released?
Well, that's a good question, because indie development, this goes back to there not really being a handbook and people just kind of winging it and making up their own sort of ideas of best practices and things of that sort, and some people not abiding by best practices at all. I feel like more than half the indie developers out there I talk to, we start in the process later than we would normally like to. So, it just depends on what you want to get out of the time you have before release when you complete your game, and how much kind of build up you've had to that point. There's always things to think about. So say if you're an early access release, people are going to notice if you just stop developing your game for 2 to 3 months to do marketing. That's not a bad thing. If you tell them, hey, we're going to stop doing this for 2 to 3 months, we're going to do marketing. I think we'll get into the early access talk in a little bit, but I think there's one developer who actually pulled their game for a time between early access and launch, and that was one good tactic to sort of revitalize the interest and all that into the game heading to 1.0. Get me back on track, Josh.
About if you're going to work on a game, if it's time to start preparing for a launch,
right?
Do you? I guess here's one. We've seen. I have certainly seen my fair share of indie developers on Twitter joke about this, but doing patches and revisions of your game, 24 hours before your game is supposedly coming out. Is that typically something that we see, or is that one of those cases where that you really don't want to do that?
I don't think you typically would want it to have that going on. You obviously want. This gets back to the timing of what kind of buzz is going around your game. So if your game is ready to go and everybody, and there's just hundreds, thousands of people just sitting there saying please release it, that kind of thing, then there might not be a whole lot of good reason to put that off for very long. But if you don't have that, it's not like you're going to put that off necessarily indefinitely. That's the catch-22 there, because I've been using that word of the day, or that phrase of the day, is that you have to launch sometime usually. There's financially you can't just go months and months and months of marketing. So 2 to 3 months is usually I think a good spot. But that is going off the idea that you've already put in X amount of efforts.
You already
marketing.
Right. You already know that the game is coming out. You have as you said earlier, you have a really good understanding of your development window. You know that, with the amount of work I've done, with the amount of work I've left, that 3 months, 4 months, whatever, that's going to be when this game's going to be done.
Right, and hopefully you've also done those early exposures we were just talking
Mm-hmm.
about. That you've had those, you know, the websites running, the trailers out
The
there.
press kits available, the whole shebang.
Hopefully you have some coverage if you've given some people access early on that can talk about it. You know, I don't do the thing where you put all your chips in the idea of like, oh, we don't want to give anybody this exclusive kind of like thing and stuff. That comes and goes. That, you know, things pass. You want to get you know, kind of those early looks if you can.
Definitely. And again, as we said earlier, it's very important to do that when your game is at the point where people can play it and really appreciate what's there. Like, I've made a point for myself that I don't want to play a game that's in a pre-alpha state. I want to play something where, you know, 50% of the game content or the game design, I can't see that because it's not even in there yet. Because it doesn't help for me to show your game off when I can't really show what your game is about.
Right, and that's a good point, and that's something that I think early access releases have learned, or, you know, people who have released early access games for the last couple of years have learned either the hard way or otherwise.
Exactly.
Is that you need to have a completed, you know, you have to have some sort of completed form of a game there. It doesn't have to have all the bells and whistles. It doesn't have to be necessarily even feature complete. Like you said, if the feature's not there, then you can forgive its absence because you don't really you're not really aware of its existence. But if it's just buggy, or there's, you know, clearly, you know, major
things missing,
art assets and things like that missing, that's not something that you're going to be able to sell very well at all anymore. If it was viable a few years ago, it's definitely not now.
And for those of you watching this live right now, I'm going to put out the last call for game launch related questions before we start talking about early access next. While we wait for any last minute questions, I guess to wrap up some of the questions that I have for you, Eric, regarding a game launch. I guess, as we've said, when it comes to putting the word out there or getting things going, one of the things I was thinking about is the trouble of, like, let's say, for instance, that my game is almost... Oh, here's the part about when to actually decide what day you want to launch your game. This is one of those very weird topics. I'm sure it's one that not a lot of any developers, or probably even most developers, think about. But with so many games coming out on a day-to-day basis, it's becoming, as we've said over this cast and the previous one, it's a lot harder for people to find your game or to get that, you know, buzz when your game is launched. So, and this could probably be even just multiple questions right here, but how do you decide what day to release your game? And longtime fans of Game Wisdom know we've talked about this before with like major releases. Like, if I know Call of Duty is coming out next week, I'm not releasing my game on that day. But what do you think about that, Eric?
Right. So, I think that it's gotten to a point where we're currently at where Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday release days are the days that I would normally look to, because you can coincide your press and influencer coverage best that way. And that's how it has been for a bit now. That's not necessarily new. What was new was about a year or two ago, as Steam was kind of figuring out their new systems as they were updating, and as the new trending sections and all that were getting figured out. It was easier back then to get. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Give me the question one more time. I need to get back to focus on the Steam bit.
Regarding what it means, like, to pick a day to launch your game.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much. Okay, so I Monday and Friday. So historically, those are days you just don't release a game on most of the time, because Monday is just everybody's coming back off the weekend. It's hard to get a whole lot of press coverage on those days. Friday, everybody's kind of checked out. It's the end of the week. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday was sort of the standard. Tuesday, as industry people know, Tuesday is AAA day usually, AAA releases. So Wednesdays and Thursdays were often the days that we would look to if there was a major AAA release we were trying to avoid. And if we were going to get caught in the wake of something, then maybe we would completely decide, like you said, we need to be weeks away from this instead of just days, or a different day. But there was when Steam was establishing. This is where I got lost before. When Steam was establishing their new kind of release system and how releases bubble up, it became possible to launch on a Friday, get into the new popular release section on the front page, and if you released, say, on like a Tuesday, this was still recent enough that the releases were so heavy that if you released on a Tuesday, even if you were a popular new release, it was possible that you would be pushed off of the front page's top 10 of that within 24 hours, so under 24 hours, which is obviously a short amount of time. So
yes.
It was kind of discovered, hey, on if you release on a Friday, you know things don't release on Saturday and Sunday typically, if at all. There are, again, exceptions for everything, but for the most part, you are not allowed to launch a Steam release on Saturday or Sunday. So if you're able to launch on Friday and you pop into the new and trending section, you get essentially 48 to 72 extra hours out of that. And they found a way to basically course correct that now, with the new and trending section the way it is now. It really doesn't matter what day you're launching on, and because I think it's still historically that Monday and Friday are the tougher days to really drive the impressions, drive the visibility of the sales. It's come back to where people are really focused on like finding a slight opening on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday if they can. So, and that goes back to, okay, looking at what other games you're competing against. Hopefully, if it's another game within your genre, whether it's better or worse than your game based on your impressions, that can still be damaging to your launch. So you might want to find some distance from that. Obviously, a major, not like the biggest release, but a really notable indie developer releasing a game that day that could suck up a lot of your press. You might want to look to move away from that. You have to decide on how big of an impact folks are going to make, and you can do that based off of historical evidence. Okay, indies seem to really take over for a day or two unless they're just crazy major, going huge, and there's a lot to talk about. Then most indies get their coverage in a day or two, and people move on. Okay, so if I see a big major indie release, I don't have to necessarily worry about getting weeks away from that game. But rather just not launch on the same exact day, have a plan going on for when to launch before or after that. So it's to me, it's about seeing what games you're going to be competing against, which half of them you're not going to know because half of them don't have coming soon pages on Steam, and won't until they launch. The good news is that probably most of those games aren't going to be that good, but like the flip of it is that there's always going to be some big major indie that's just sort of not. That's like, I'll sell 1 million copies, so I don't need to do my coming soon page, and they don't. So they that's how they go about it as well. So you never know when that's going to happen as well. I've actually spoken to a developer who has been like, we did our homework, we saw the coming soon pages that were available, and then these two guys drop out of nowhere on us on launch date. So that's it's again, luck, good and bad, is such a critical element that you cannot control in this process.
Yeah. Now, I guess here's my last launch-related question, and then we'll move on to early access. And again, we'll keep this about maybe, I would say, 30 more minutes. I think that will be our stop point. And
cool. That's what my bladder's got left in it. I think it's about 30 minutes. So.
All right, Mister. Thanks for coming out. And yeah, be sure you can watch the archive version of this when it goes up in a few weeks. But here's the last question, and then we'll move on to our next topic. Holidays. Holiday sales, the whole holiday seasons have become a very big part for just about all aspects of the game industry. We see, winter sales, holiday sales. I'm sure right now, as we're talking at the end of January, there's probably going to be another sale in like the next month or so. When it comes to releasing your game, What are your general thoughts about when it comes to the timing of holidays?
Yeah, I think it's critical to have those in mind, given Steam's full takeovers of their site when they do those summer sale, Thanksgiving, around Thanksgiving time, and then around the end of the year, um, into New Year's. You do not want. I mean, they will tell you if you're a developer. They'll actively state on their documentation not to launch a game during those times, and launching before or after them too close is hazardous as well. I think that there's ways to work them to your benefit. If you're a month or two out, you can rerun your launch discount very quickly. If you have a holiday sale like on the kind of coming on the tail end of your launch. And like I said before, some games, a lot of games find it very difficult to sell at the rate that the developer is hoping to at full price. Yeah. So it's certainly not a bad idea to take advantage of being able to discount as much as possible. Now, you don't want to discount as high as possible, as much as possible. You want to be really strategic about where your discount levels are. I think low-level discounts can be as active as you want. If you believe you're not going to be generating, or you haven't generated a lot of full-price sales, but you're seeing good numbers at 20 or 25% off, then you want to kind of ride that horse until she breaks, basically. So until you would consider going 40% or 50%, anything like that. So. Am I covered the question there, or is there...
Yeah, you did bring up one point I just want to touch on. You said releasing a game not too soon before or after a holiday. I just want to expand on that for a second. From what you've seen, what you've worked with, what is considered a safe window before or after a holiday? That window when it's not going to affect you as much.
Well, I guess if you want to reference your 30 to 45 days, that certainly would be a good thing to work off of, right? Because you're saying, I want to have those days sort of unaffected by the impact that those holiday sales and those site takeovers can make, while you still want to be able to benefit from them. And so you have to decide. I have a couple of developer friends. If their philosophy is, if they release a $25 or $30 game a couple months shy of a major holiday sale, they might just skip it entirely. Now, their sales have to be well enough or high enough to give them that gumption to do that. Because if you don't participate in the sales, especially when you have a newer release, and if you already did a launch discount, why not just run it again? I don't think you're hurting anything by doing that. And then you just get the additional exposure and visibility. Now, I understand that in major full kind of store-wide sales or kind of opt-in store-wide sales, you're going to be competing with a ton of individuals. But if you're not on discount at all, you're just not in the pool competing at all. You're not going to be getting any exposure. And we're obviously still hoping that Valve can continue to figure out a way to better kind of match Steam's user base with all the variety of games that they have on their store. I don't think that's at all optimized yet, and that's still something. And that's not a fault of Valve necessarily. I think that's a really hard thing to do, and still something that is being discovered and people are researching, and smarter people than myself are working on trying to figure out how to do.
Yeah, and one topic that's definitely too big to get into today, but that also with game launches, is pricing your game. As you said just now regarding sales and understanding what percentages, but that would definitely take us a good 30-40 minutes to get into now, so we'll have to say that for another time.
Definitely.
But let's move on and talk about what early access changes to this equation. And again, early access, we could probably spend an entire podcast on that, but we'll try and keep us maybe like 10 to 15 minutes if that works for you, and then we'll move on to our last part. But as we all know, and I'm sure you watching this right now, either live or recorded, early access has radically changed what it means to sell and publicize your games. And for the games that make it work, it can lead to a really successful pre-launch, release, and even post-launch, as we've seen with games like Prison Architect, Darkest Dungeon, and even something like Subnautica that I think is coming out or came out this very day that we're recording. But there is a lot that can go wrong with early access, and not every game can fully work with that platform. So I guess the first question, I think this could either be really big or really short, is as someone who works with game launches and working with developers as they're finishing up their game, how does early access throw a monkey wrench into that equation?
It's a good question because it's certainly multifaceted, the wrench it throws. And it doesn't have to be a wrench. It's just part of the plan, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're planning for an early access release, then you're having to think that you're considering certain things. You're considering that your game is in some form on sale to the public. Your game is on Steam now. It will not get to be on Steam for the first time again. Yeah. That in itself is a topic, kind of its own thing, because things have changed over the last couple of years where because of the trends of early access, that the featuring of early access by Valve has become less. It's not necessarily completely removed, but they are they're not going to be jumping in on exposing a ton of early access games unless like that early access game in particular is selling very, very well. Let's just say that, right? And that didn't necessarily used to be the case. It was just kind of early access games and 1.0 releases sort of combating against each other on the market. So now to my knowledge, the way it currently works, when you launch from early access to 1.0, you still get essentially what you would get when you launch a product for the first time on Steam. The flip of that is now the early access launches are more muted than they were before. And I think that this is a good trade. I think that this makes a lot of sense. Yeah. If your early access game is gold, it's going to take off. It's going to take off anyway. It'll sell well. And then when it gets to 1.0, it gets a better exposure hit anyway. But if it doesn't launch super duper well, or it's just too early on, then you at least have an opportunity to recover with that 1.0 launch, and that wasn't necessarily the case all the time. Yeah. So I think that's a big deal. It's a big side kind of thing to think about. Having your early access means that your game is essentially a commercial product but it's not quite yet. So essentially that you have to deal with all of the customer service and community management and responding to Steam user reviews and feedback and things of that sort. And the nice thing is that you can respond to it in a way that can benefit your game in the future, and you can make improvements and work together with your community and say, okay, we're gonna get this straightened out, and even in kind of real time, you can see maybe your early access review scores go from mixed to positive based on, or vice versa. If you're not listening, or this in some cases a major update, a major change happens, and that can upset a community for one reason or another, and the developer has to figure out how they're going, how they're going to proceed from there, and it's not necessarily always obvious. So, as far as our process goes, I would still be looking to reach out to. So this is like where early access relevance comes in, right? So instead of just genre relevance, so who covers a puzzle game, who covers an RPG, it's like actually who's interested in covering this game before it's ready to go, before it's 1.0. you still want to be, like we talked about, you still want the game to be in a really good state, so that those people who do play the game, who do consider covering it, are wowed and are just willing to just talk about it really positively. But you don't want to just send it to a bunch of people who are like anti-early access or like, please send me a final product only kind of thing. You need to be really aware of that as well. So, not just if you have an established contact list, not just getting everyone on it as soon as you hit early access, unless of course you have designed that contact list specifically for the early access release.
Yeah. And as you said, Eric, this is a major topic, and it's one we are not going to fully explore in the next 10-15 minutes. There's just way too much of it to discuss here. And going back to what you just said, when it comes to, like as we said before, you have to have your game in the right state for it to go into early access. It has to be at that point where people can see what it is. And I think you had a really good point there about how if your game has a really strong opening, then that will kind of, like, you don't need like a huge bang for 1.0. But the reverse. Let's say you have just an okay release on early access, you can then play it the hell up at 1.0 to say, look at all we've done over X amount of months, and this is what our game is now.
Right, and then on the other side, and this isn't super positive, but it's good to give the other side, is an early access release that has all these sort of, maybe not promises, but things that are listed out on the early access section, and secretly the sales don't go, or privately the sales aren't going very well, and the development team are having to ask themselves whether or not they're going to be able to see this through to 1.0. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're financially in trouble with their own funds, but rather that they might not have the financially viable product that they imagined that they had, that they expected to have. Yeah. So that's something to, I don't think a player of a game would ever consider. But if someone jumps in on an early access game and just loves it and is wondering why things are taking time or it's not going as well as expected, that's definitely a likely scenario, or that's a likely scenario.
Yeah. And for any developers watching this right now, I just want to reiterate what we said earlier when it comes to releasing your game. And the same is hold true for early access. And that is, you cannot, and we said this also, you cannot just release, your very first alpha on early access these days. You need, as we said, you need to have something that people can latch on to. And we saw that period, I'm sure you can agree as well, Eric. We had that period of time where basically everyone was putting Alpha 1 onto early access and saying, oh, our game's going to be finished in 4 years from now. And you can't do that anymore. There has to be something there that we can look at. Like, a good example would be when I played the game Dead Cells in 2017. That game was far from being finished content-wise, but from a foundation standpoint, you saw what this game was going to be. It's not like it's going to turn into a first-person visual novel game 6 months down the line.
Right. There's the design's all there. It's all in place. It's not going to change, and that's important to know. Obviously, for an early access player, they don't want to have sweeping changes to the game that they bought into, because that early idea, that early sort of pitch, that's what they went for, right? So they would like to see the delivery of that, be comparable to what was expected. But yeah, early access, we could definitely talk about that.
I know.
For a long time. I was going to mention, so the last thing I would mention about it on my end is, be open to doing an off-Steam pre-release, purchase option, pre-early access. That's a great way to, as a kind of as a metric to figure out, hey, am I early access ready? You can probably figure that out by offering like a purchase option for if you feel like your alpha your early alpha is such a good idea that you want to get it out there and get it into people's hands and even sell it at that point. There's nothing wrong with that, but don't bring it to Steam unless you feel like, like you have that that complete foundation, like you mentioned. Otherwise, be open to doing a pre-release sale on your own site through, there's plenty of independent vendors that will help you do that, like FastSpring, or even PayPal, and you get a lot of the benefits you would get out of early access without having to take that shot yet, until you're ready to do that. And then you're almost certainly, if you do that and you do it well, that pre-early access, it's going to lead to a better early access launch and subsequent 1.0 launch, because you're going to have more information. You're going to be relying on more than just thin air to work off of.
Yeah, and as you said, you really only get one chance to launch your game on early access, and it's very important to do that right. And like as we said, there's so many topics to talk about. I'm just like biting my tongue here because I don't want to bring up enough to bring this into like hour 3 and 4. So here is my last early access question for you, Eric, and then we'll move on to our last topic. And this goes back to what you were saying regarding 1.0. What, as we said, 1.0 can either be a huge spectacle or it can just be like a, quiet flipping a switch. As someone who work with any developers and what you've seen, what do you have any tips or suggestions for someone for when it's time to say your game is 1.0?
From marketing PR or from like a design development standpoint, like
I know both could easily be like a 30-minute question. Let's do marketing first, and if there's time we'll talk about design.
Right. So from a marketing perspective, you're basically like looking to have a pre-existing community that is buzzed and hyped up and ready to go. That you think, hey, this right here can carry us if nothing else goes right. If we don't get the coverage that we're expecting to come in, the coverage we already have established. When I say pre-existing community, I don't just mean like players. I mean everybody who's supported you to that point. Is that enough, do you feel, to roll the dice and launch? And I guess if it feels like a gamble, then maybe you should consider that and understand what that means to you. Because if you don't want it to be a gamble, then you're going to have to figure things out. And like we talked about, time isn't something that's going to wait necessarily. You don't necessarily have an infinite amount of time to do that. So I don't know. It's a tough call. But yeah, from the marketing perspective, definitely you're looking for. We have buzz, hype. We have lead time to get this
People
out.
Know about, yeah.
Right. We have lead time to get our efforts done as far as marketing PR efforts, which means weeks, if not a full month for anybody who's traditionally going to like be writing up an article for you, or maybe in a magazine article. Like if you do print media, you want, obviously print media is even longer because they're going to be doing it for the magazine after this next month usually, unless you're super lucky on timing there. So you have to, those kind of things you got to keep in consideration.
All right. And yeah, I know I'm starting to feel as well, so we'll wrap things up in the next few minutes. For you folks watching this now, I'm going to put out last call for questions now before we get to our final topic. That way we have them. But I'm going to say like 5-6 minutes, and then that is going to do it, because I'm sure you're getting tired. We all need to go, refill, or we need to go have dinner at some point.
Yeah, and like another hour, and I would definitely have like a UTI or something like that. So definitely have to worry about that as well.
Yeah, so we better get going here. So here's our final topic, and this one should be fairly quick because I don't think there's too much to talk about, at least for right now. I mean, again, this could be its own podcast, but I want to talk about post-launch very fast. Now, post-launch again. Oh, I just said again twice there, but has been something that has become more and more of a factor, not just in the independent space, but in AAA space over the last 5 years. As we said before, it's no longer a matter of I release my game, it's done. Maybe I put out a patch or two for bugs, but we move on to the next. Now it's I release my game. If it does well, I may be working on this for 6, 12 months down the line. We've seen some games get into years. But when it comes to that immediate action, and I think we'll just focus on that because we can get through that in the next 5-10 minutes. But it's, day plus one after your game has been launched. As a developer, what do you start to do, or what do you start to think about of your game now that, it's been out, the trial is over, kind of thing?
Right. So, I mean, typically you'll already have some plans, various contingencies based on how things go. I know from experience, most developers, most teams are wiped at that point, very tired, very exhausted. So it's important to remind yourself that you really don't owe anybody anything right off the bat. Like, I think personally, to remind yourself that you don't owe anyone any post-launch or anything of that support. Like, it's to me, it has to be. It's not a luxury. Players have great ideas and they should be implemented if the team has time. But if the developer had the idea that this was 1.0 and was going to move on, hopefully that was communicated well. Probably never is, but you just have to understand that. I would imagine some developers, like you said, don't plan for that. Now, financially, if it's viable, do they adjust? Of course. Like, I mean, if it's like a major money-making thing for them, most of them are going to adjust at that point and say, well, I wasn't planning on making this game or making new content for this game, but all of the feedback and the sales are high enough to suggest that we can do this. And then there's that side of, like, is the feedback, and then hopefully if you were planning any post-launch content, like, is there actually any viable post-launch content that exists for this game, or are we just sort of making things up? That's important, I think, as well, is if the game actually is meant for that. If your game is just selling really well and it's a 1.0 darling and it's finished, then there's other things that you're going to be thinking about than doing post-launch content. We talked about that earlier. You're just trying to get the most out of what you have there. But like you said, there's so many other games. I guess don't take your cue from the fact that, oh, this didn't launch very well, so let's just keep pumping away at the post-launch content and it'll work out, because usually that's not the case. If you, as far as like a business PR perspective, if you are able to plan and say, we're going to develop some free content updates, and the first premium DLC, we're going to, we'll say we'll have those free content updates. We'll do it in a way that lets the work staff, people who are working on those free content updates, those are the folks that have some sort of gas left in the tank once we hit launch. If everybody's just completely trashed, and it's like, we should just give this some time to breathe, and then of course you read and react, and it's really easy to read and react off of like insufficient data, say like a couple hours or whatever the case is, and sometimes things don't pick up in the first 24 hours and they do in the first 72, and you'll feel horrible and you'll feel really bad, like this is not going to work out for what feels like an eternity, and it's about 30 hours, and all of a sudden things go in the right direction and everything changes. So I think just being open to what's going on, if things are going really well and sales are picking up and there's a lot of commenters or people leaving forum threads and things of that sort, of questions and congratulations and things of that sort, then that should spur you and suggest to you, hey, maybe I have an opportunity to do more here. But yeah, it's really about, right? It's about what your game and what you think about it and what you think about what post-launch could be for it, prior to you ever seeing if it's going to hit a point of success at launch that you could say, okay, yeah, we could definitely continue to develop this game. but I don't think it's financially viable to say we're just going to launch however it goes, and then we're going to develop more. Like, I just think that that's, well, I mean, and that's also like a questionable way of designing to begin with, because you're like, wait, what's all this post-launch stuff you're talking about? Why isn't it pre-launch? Like, why isn't it 1.0 stuff? You know what I mean? So that it has to ring true that all that post-launch content that you're preparing and stuff is actually, yeah, it actually is post-launch content. And that can be the case. There can be, okay, our development pipeline is full, or our scope is for 1.0 is as vast as we're going to let this get. So all these other ideas, while we could be doing them now, we're not going to until after launch. Now that makes sense to me. That stuff, that's workable. But then of course you still have to decide if you're going to do it or not, and that's going to be based probably off of finances and how things are selling.
Yeah. And yeah, you almost mentioned the dreaded day one DLC or on this DLC there, and we start talking about that. Oh God, who knows how long we'll be here for at that point.
Well, right. I mean, it's just the idea is that like I skirted that because I know that's just not an acceptable form or fashion to go about things. Like you're doing something wrong usually if you're doing that. You're either doing something deceptive or your game's messed up, or you haven't. If it's like a patch or like you said, like something that has to get out really quickly, then something wasn't ready to go like you thought it was heading into it. So it's usually not a good sign. You know, there's like, again, we always talk about exceptions. Usually, you know, if there's a big release that goes wrong for, it can work out well for, but like it's just, that's not going to happen for most individual developers with smaller releases and stuff. Like there's not these double-edged swords of like looking at like Diablo 3, looking even like at No Man's Sky and their sales and stuff. There's obviously two sides to that blade that both those games had to go through.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I think points to a really good one to end on. What you said a few minutes ago, that you don't owe anyone post-release support, like in terms of new content. I think that's a very fair point. It's one that a lot of developers may not realize, because again, we see all these games being released on a day-to-day basis, and we see, you know, costumes, art, new music, new levels, and all that. And I think a lot of people do feel like that's becoming the standard, that's to be expected. But
right, and I would just to chime in, I would say that's the people that are doing that are either having success enough to do that, or they're chasing the successful people that are having that success. And so you have to make sure that you're not the latter, that you're the former if you're doing it, to me, or you're in love with making that game and you're passionate about making post-launch content. Then again, there's no issue with that. Like if you're happy to do it and you're financially still able to proceed, then that's all you need. And who knows what might happen? Like you might find a spike that you never knew you were going to have, or you might never have gotten to because of the efforts that you put in post launch. But again, it's not something to readily rely on. It's not something to gamble your company or budget on.
It's something that if you're going to do it, it's best to have it already as a plan. It shouldn't be you wait until the day before launch and say, hey guys, let's prepare 5 DLC packs for the next 6 months.
Right, and you should know, hey, if we don't sell another copy, that's not going to kill us.
Exactly.
That should be a really important thought to have in mind there. And I mean, yeah, it's all balance. There's also the idea of how much can I get out of my current product before I move on to my next product. Again, these are all discussions that we probably should have in the future. So.
Yeah, be careful, Eric. We'll be here for a few more hours if you keep bringing that stuff up.
Poor bladder.
Yeah. But here's the final point, and then I'll turn it over to you if you have anything to end on, Eric. And what you said regarding there are exceptions to every rule, I think that's one of the big things about the game industry, especially for people looking from the outside in. They look at games like Stardew Valley, Undertale, Minecraft, and the like, and they think these games just, they did their own thing and it worked out for them, so I should do my own thing. But as we've said, and I'm sure you can attest to it, and for everyone watching can also agree with, there is no set guideline for what it means for these games to work. Just as Undertale could become a massive success and everyone loved, it could have swung completely opposite direction. No one bought it, no one heard of it, and the like. There are, of course, things you can do to mitigate or to prepare for these challenges and risks, but at the end of the day, there is a lot that has to go right for a game to work, and very little for it to go wrong for it to fail.
Yeah, I agree with that statement, and I would just say, you know, have yourself ready to go for those contingencies, and you know, just if you can make yourself financially, find out where the numbers are for you to be able to financially continue, and that is something that's usually realistic enough to reach if you go about things the right way. But you're dead on with all those things.
All right, and like I said, we could segue into so many more topics, and if you're game, we can always have you back on in the future for our live record one, because again, there's no shortage of things we can talk about when it comes to game design.
Of course, I'm definitely interested in coming back on.
All right, so with that said, my final thing for you, Eric, is do you have a closing statement? Do you have any final thoughts or anything you would like to say before we go into our ending here?
We were just talking about it. Do your own thing, but don't do it in lieu of ignoring best practices. I think that there are some tried and true things out there that most, if not all, you know, creators should be abiding, or people who are creating commercial products should abide by. But that said, if you're just doing the best practices and not being yourself, or not kind of going about it your own way, it's harder to stand out in the crowd that way for sure. So you know, it's just like this life I'm trying to live. There's a balance to it all, and you have to have that in mind to make things, I think, work, or at least to optimize.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to end on. And again, there's so much about what it means to make a video game that most people don't even know about, and we really don't, I think, spend enough time talking about as an industry. But it is certainly getting late here, and I think it's time to say goodnight before we both collapse. So, for those of you who've been watching this, either live or recorded, thank you so much for tuning in. For you, Eric, if people want to follow you, what are some of the best places for them to reach you at?
So, if you have any questions about development, or if you're interested in partnering or anything like that, my website is theindiebros.com. It's in theindiebros.com, and there's a contact form on there, so feel free to get in touch if you have any questions, or anything of that sort. I'm also on Twitter at Game Connoisseur. I'm retweeting indie games most of the time. So if you're into that, I'm a good follow. If you're not into that, I'm probably not for you. But yeah.
All right. Well, then that is going to do it for this week. So once again, thank you for tuning in. For those of you watching this record right now, if you would like to get access to these talks early and ad-free, please check out patreon.com/gwbycer. All of our VIP pledges will get access to these talks at that point. Otherwise, these will go up usually in a week or two after our broadcasts. But we are going to wrap things up here for tonight. I will probably do some regular game streaming later this evening. But again, Eric, thank you so much for coming on. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. And if we can find the time in the coming weeks or months, it'll be great to have you back on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Josh.
All right. So with that said, thanks again for tuning in. Have a great rest of the night, and I will catch you all next time. Until then, take care.